Just a fair warning before the video begins, this video will not be spoiler free. I'll be going over my thoughts of this book, including spoilers. It calls itself Murderbot, but only when no one can hear. It worries about the fragile human crew who've grown to trust it, but only when no one can see. It tells itself they're only a professional obligation, but when they're captured and an old friend from the past requires urgent assistance, Murderbot must choose between inertia and drastic action. Drastic action it is then. So, network effect. And unfortunately you're going to have to look at my face, because I don't have any video game footage to basically put over this one like I have for the previous ones. So instead you're going to get me in my dressing gown. I'm off sick today because I got food poisoning on a work trip, so that's kind of why I look like shit right now. Not that I usually look amazing or anything, but you know, need to shave, but I kind of can't be arsed, so I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to talk about a book. Network Effect by Martha Wells, which is the first novel in the Murderbot Diaries series. All of the ones before this being novellas, and the one after this, Fugitive Telemetry, being also a novella. There's one more novel in the series, System Collapse. So yeah, this is the first novel, and it's quite a bit chunkier than the novellas. The novellas are usually about 170 pages long. This is 350 pages long. So essentially this is double the length of one of the novellas. You're getting two Murderbot novellas in one, basically. And I was quite critical of the last Murderbot book that I read. And the last Murderbot book that I read was Fugitive Telemetry, which I read before this one, even though it was published after this one, because chronologically Fugitive Telemetry takes place before Network Effect. Part of the reason I was so critical of that book was because I'd already started reading Network Effect by the time I made my video on Fugitive Telemetry, and I still hold the view that nothing really happens in Fugitive Telemetry that's worth really reading. The mystery isn't that good or anything, in my opinion, and there's not really any great Murderbot moments in my view. All of the development that Murderbot undergoes in Fugitive Telemetry is very basically cloned at the start of this book, and it is basically doubled up throughout this book, I suppose you could say. You don't need to read Fugitive Telemetry. It's an optional book if you really, really are a Murderbot superfan. If you like that book, great. If you want more Murderbot, go read it, I suppose. Personally, I just didn't like it, which is fine. You know, like, you don't have to. It's not one of the main books anyway. It's kind of its own thing in between the books. So you know, it's not really part of the main story. It's just kind of like a side episode. But I'm glad to say that Murderbot is fucking back, because this book slaps. It's not perfect. I do have some things that I didn't like about it that I want to talk about. But I think ultimately, next to Exit Strategy, this is my favourite Murderbot book so far. So probably I'd put it just a bit higher than Exit Strategy. It is a novel, not a novella. I've mentioned alongside some other criticisms of the previous books that the issues may be due to the fact that it's a novella, you know. Limited page count, word count, skipping over details for the sake of brevity, you know, writing mires that kind of naturally occur as a result of the novella format. So while this is one of my favourite books in the series, I'm going to be a bit more critical of it, because I don't think that it has the excuse of being a novella. It has double the page count, so a lot of the writing quirks in the previous books that I didn't like are still present in this book, and I don't really think there's an excuse for it when you've got a page count this long. Especially when a lot of the problems I have with this book could have been fixed with 2 or 3 extra pages worth of words. So, yeah. This video is going to be a bit longer than the other ones, and it's going to be a bit more critical. But ultimately, this is one of my favourite books in the series, so do keep that in mind when I'm talking about them. And I'll start with what I enjoyed, and then move on to any gripes I have with the book in the second section of the video. And then I'll do a little bit of a conclusion, kind of a ramble about my overall thoughts, and finish the video there. Right, so the first good point, which I'm sure no one's really going to be surprised to hear, is that Murderbot's going strong in this book. What else can I really say? Is Murderbot being Murderbot? All the sarcasm and wit and sass that you would expect from Murderbot is present in this book. And on top of that, Murderbot also has like quite a significant amount of character development in this book. In lots of ways, but I don't really want to go on about it, but I thought it was one of the strongest. Murderbot again was the strongest element of this book, which you would expect because the books are about Murderbot. But Murderbot, the book kind of ends with Murderbot finally deciding it wants to, what it wants to do with its time, which is a major step, because throughout the book so far, Murderbot's kind of been going with the flow and just kind of following people that it finds itself attached to. Mensa mainly. But with the reintroduction of art into this book and the rekindling of that relationship, mutually administrative assistance. With the rekindling of that mutually administrative assistance, Murderbot has decided that it wants to stay with art and to go on missions with art, which is a very significant step for Murderbot to take, because it's almost like Murderbot is kind of going through this character arc that's very similar to the growth of an adult, of a person into an adult. Where you can kind of view Murderbot as this kind of clueless child at the start almost, who then meets humans and learns a bit more about the world, and then kind of goes with the Preservation Orcs crew and kind of matures a bit, and now is kind of ready to leave the nest, you know, to move on and find their own place, in the galaxy. And this is kind of like, definitely feels that way, this little interaction that Murderbot has at the end with Mensa, where Murderbot kind of says, I want to stay with art, and Murderbot says, but I also don't want to not see you. And Mensa goes, well, that's fine, because you can always come visit us. And the whole thing just felt like a kid having a discussion, like a young adult having a discussion with their parents about how they're going to move out. And it was great. The Murderbot's development in this, Murderbot has a lot of character moments in this book that are hard hitting, they're well done, and Murderbot in general kind of is obviously the star of this book. So, unlike Fugitive Telemetry, where for me Murderbot felt like a bit of a weaker character, and a lot of their interactions kind of felt arsehole-ish and didn't have the direction that they usually had in the previous books, and it just kind of felt like everything that's happening didn't really lead anywhere, and Murderbot just kind of be a dick for no reason, and it just kind of didn't mesh. This does, again, like start to mesh, and there's some real character development here. Murderbot is moving on to a new stage in her life, almost. Well, literally, and that's very significant. So, yeah, Murderbot a great part of this book, unsurprisingly. Yeah, we love Murderbot. Next point is art is back, in all of its glory. Art, ever since art was introduced in Artificial Condition, every book after that, for me, has kind of felt like it has an art-shaped hole in it. There was something about art and Murderbot's kind of interactions that really made art feel like they were going to become a permanent member of the crew. Like, there was a lot more effort put onto art as a character than there was any other character in the series up until that point, I would say. And when they just kind of left, it was a bit disappointing. And every book after that, I was kind of like, when's art going to turn up again? When's art going to turn up again? When's art going to turn up again? And in this book they do, and it was great. It was great. It happens in an interesting way. It kind of comes out of nowhere. And on top of that, not only is art back, but art is back, and we kind of see art in a completely different light. Because in the original book, when art's introduced in Artificial Condition, Murderbot meets art, but they're kind of just like a ship that they get onto to travel, and that's how they meet. And they just kind of make friends, I guess. And then art continues to help Murderbot out when they get on the station in Artificial Condition. But to Murderbot's knowledge, art is just a very advanced transport. Even though it's very clear and heavily implied that that's not what they are, they're clearly more than that, quite a bit more than that. This book confirms that quite, confirms it explicitly. And we learn that art is actually part of a organization that goes around and basically combats the expansion of Corporation Rim, just corporate interests in general, and as a result, everything that kind of is implied by art makes sense all of a sudden. And we also see art as kind of a hard ass and kind of terrifying sometimes, and art's in just a completely different light, because the situation in this book is that art's crew has been kidnapped, and art creates a situation where Murderbot gets taken on board and can help out to get their people, to get their crew back. The truth is that art is basically forcing Murderbot to help, pretty much, and they kind of fall out at the start over this, but they make up later on. And this new side of art is kind of like, it's kind of scary, as kind of a scary character. Was really cool to see, really. It's quite interesting. And art's just a massive savage in this book. Art does not fuck around in this book. I think art threatens the life of pretty much every character in this book at least once. Threatens the lives of everyone on the colony that they're at in this book multiple times. Art is completely fine with just carpet bombing an entire colony if they need to. It's interesting. It definitely see art in a completely different light. It's very interesting because art's supposed to be the one that cares about humans, but at the same time, it's clear that art cares mostly not about humans in general, but about their crew. Because art just kind of doesn't care about just bombing a bunch of humans or manipulating humans to get what it wants. So a lot of depth is added to art as a character. We see them in a new light. So yeah, overall this was a great great reintroduction of a character that, for me, felt like was going to be a main character the whole time, but unfortunately didn't turn out to be that way. So it's great to have Art back. Art, besides Murderbot, is my favourite character in these books, and is the only character, in my opinion, besides Mensa and Murderbot, that feels at all fleshed out. And anyway, and that's not to say that I like them just because they're a little bit fleshed out. Murderbot, Mensa, and Art are very well fleshed out. It's just that the rest of the characters in these books aren't at all. So yeah, the reintroduction of Art, and Art just being in this book was great. I could go on forever about this, so I'm just going to move on. So I kind of implied this or referenced it a bit earlier in, but mutual administrative assistance. When Murderbot gets asked what term it would like Art and its relationship to be referred to as, because it doesn't like the term friendship, it doesn't like the term relationship because it implies something romantic. It gets asked what term it would like, and it says mutual administrative assistance, which is obviously ridiculous, but nonetheless hilarious. And one of the main focuses of this book is Murderbot and Art's kind of relationship. They fall out and they bicker, and they but at the same time they exhibit this kind of total devotion to one another that is almost like an unconditional love. Which really pushes the borders of platonic, to be honest with you. I mean, it could definitely be extremely familial, but they don't really feel like family. Their relationship isn't like that, so they don't feel like they have a brotherly or sibling relationship. They don't feel like they have a relationship like between father and son or whatever. It's just a very strong and emotionally wrought relationship for sure, because they clearly care about each other a lot. They care about each other more than any other character in the series. I think Murderbot probably cares about Art just as much, if not more, than it does about Mensa. And it's the exploration of that relationship that I really, really enjoyed reading in this book. I mean, there are moments in this book which really nail home how important they are to each other, even if they don't outwardly state it, for obvious reasons, mainly being that Murderbot is just emotionally incapable. Has the emotional intelligence of a snail, but the first one is that Murderbot goes completely apeshit when they think Art is deleted, and then the other one is that when Murderbot gets kidnapped and taken to the colony, Art flat out threatens to glass the whole fucking planet unless they give Murderbot back. And when they're like, "You won't glass our planet," Art instead just blows up one of the places that they're growing food, their agricultural centre, of which they don't have many. So he's already basically guaranteed they're going to struggle to survive just from that. And then goes, You want to test that? You want to test that? They're like, no, we don't want to test that. So really looking forward to seeing where they go as a couple. Sorry, mutually administrative assistance. Yeah, that's one of the main things that I really enjoyed about this book, and it's kind of ties into the previous point of Art just coming back. Art really just elevated this book so much for me. Bit of a minor point, but this book, I think Martha Wells has used the increased page count to really take the opportunity to improve the world building a little bit. All the world building is that bad, I don't think. I don't necessarily think that a world that is built through natural description and things that occur, I don't necessarily think that that's bad. But that's how it's done in these books, and the world building tends to be a bit light. You know, things aren't really explained, they just kind of are. It's not like encyclopedic, like say for example the way Brandon Sanderson does world building or whatever. The exposition in these books is not world building focused generally, and that changes a bit in this book. I think that there's more of a focus on the world outside the Corporation Rim and what the galaxy is actually like in general. As to say, there's a focus on the history of the world. We know that the Corporation Rim hasn't always been around now. There's a time period which is pre-Corporation Rim. We know roughly how long ago that was. We know what kind of things were going on early in your corporate era. We know about these terraforming projects that were going on, how they would work, how they would be used to basically enslave the populace. So there's a lot of things going on in this book, and then there's also the introduction of non-corporate factions. An example of that being the university that Ark was created by, presumably he was created by them, and if it was purchased by them or something, possibly. Maybe Ark's from Corporation Rim, but I would assume he was created by the faction that owns him. But that faction is introduced, so we know that there are factions in the galaxy that are basically opposing the corporations. This is a bit more than we knew, quite a bit more than we knew before. Like I said, the world buildings were very minimal. We know that corporates are a thing. We know the Corporation Rim is part of the galaxy, which is controlled by a corporate society. And we know that there are non-corporate entities. But that was it, really, apart from knowing that preservation's a thing. We don't know how common non-corporate entities are. We don't know how many they are. We don't know what they do. Obviously, preservation just kind of exists and tries to stay out of corporate politics and just not be shit. Tries its best to not be shit. Whereas this faction that Art is part of are an active participant in basically getting in the way of corporate entities from doing evil corporate shit. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought it's a bit of a minor point, but I thought that it's not really one of the main things in the book. If you know what I mean. It was definitely a strength of this book for me. Every now and then, every few pages, there would be a little world building tidbit that come up, and I'd be like, "Oh, it's interesting," which wasn't really a thing for me in the previous books. There was the odd thing, and I did find the world interesting in the general sense. I mean, the world building is perfectly serviceable in all these books from the perspective of delivering Murderbot's story, you know. But this felt like the first time that Martha Wells has kind of gone a bit further with it and tried to develop the world in general, just beyond what we strictly need to know for the story. So, yeah, I think that this is a general upgrade to the world building, and some of the extra page count in this book has been effectively used for that purpose. So, that's good. That's great, and I'm happy to see it. Next point is a bit of a big one. The plot. The plot in this book, for me, is a big improvement. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos about any other books I've read, you know I'm not necessarily a big plot guy. I'm more interested in characters and the story being driven by the characters, as opposed to the story forcing the characters to be active participants in it by circumstance. This book is like that. This book is definitely a case where Murderbot is forced to go along with the story. But it doesn't lose its character-driven focus, and the plot is far better in this book, in my opinion, than any of the others. The plot has a beginning, a middle, we'll talk about the middle later, and an end. And the climax of this book for me was generally the most interesting climax of the lot. There were plot points, story beats, and threads woven throughout the story that could have given you the ability to predict the ending of this book. And what was going on the colony was actually something that I actually just wanted to find out about in general. Usually, the plot doesn't even have enough time for me to give a shit what's really going on, except anything that's directly except anything that's directly related to Murderbot, basically. Whereas this book kind of evolved the storytelling a bit for me in that regard. I was interested in the story just out in this book, just generally. That being said, the story in this book isn't amazing or anything. It's just that the previous books, the plot is so wishy-washy, so kind of middling, and barely interesting that this one really stuck out to me. And I'm not going to go on and say the plot's like amazing or anything, because it's not. But it does introduce some interesting things that were not present in the previous books, and it does take us on kind of an actual narratively complete story that the others, for a lot of the others for me, didn't feel like they were specifically 1 and 2. So that's great. And the plot in general just feels like it stands on its own 2 feet as a plot, whereas the others felt like the plot was kind of lagging behind and was kind of a corpse that the other good elements of the books were dragging it through for me. Whereas this isn't the case in this one. I do have one big gripe about the plot though, specifically to do with pacing, but I'll go and talk about that in the bad section. But generally I do think this is a big improvement, and though I don't think it's amazing but on its own merit completely, it's actually a very passable to okay plot, which I don't think any of the others had, apart from exit strategy. So there you go, the plot. I think the plot was a big improvement. The next thing is Martha Wells tries a kind of, towards the last third of this book, kind of a multi-POV approach, which is quite interesting actually, because I think having multi-POV in these books actually from this point onwards would probably be quite a good idea, even if it's just the odd chapter that's from someone, or the odd part of a chapter that's from another character's perspective. In this book, there are 2 other perspectives other than Murderbot. There is Murderbot 2.0. So Murderbot 2.0 is basically a digital baby that Art and Murderbot create as a basis for some killware, which they're going to upload to an enemy ship so that they can save Art's crew members on the ship. And the third is 3. Who is another sec unit that Murderbot 2.0 frees from its governor module on board of said ship. So both these characters have viewpoint chapters while Murderbot's doing something else, and this does something that the other books aren't able to do, which is that 2 kind of plot points or stories can be happening at the same time, and that can make the plot more interesting, which is one of the narrative tools that Martha Wells uses in this book, which is obviously a very basic thing, but nonetheless is not something that's in the previous books, to actually kind of make the plot more engaging and make the story more interesting, because there's multiple things going on, there's multiple characters with different motivations, and like Murderbot 2.0 was really cool, but it was basically just Murderbot. Then later on, Murderbot 2.0 re-uploads itself to Murderbot, and unfortunately Murderbot 2.0 dies at the end of the book, which is necessary for an important emotional moment for Murderbot, but I think it's a bit of a shame, because it would have been kind of cool for Murderbot to have another Murderbot in their brain in the next book, just kind of like a Murderbot arguing with itself. I think Murderbot would be far more likely to listen to Murderbot to itself, literally another instance of itself telling it it's being stupid. And I think that would have been a cool character dynamic. And in the short time that they were inhabiting the same body, it was a cool character dynamic, and it was really interesting. But nonetheless, Murderbot 2.0 passes on. And 3 just kind of is there at the end of the book. It's not really clear what's going to happen with them. I think they might go back to preservation, maybe. And 3 has some viewpoint chapters in this book, and this is kind of where it's going to kind of be a middling point, not necessarily a totally good point, because the way so lots of authors try and make each character have its own internal voice in the text when that character is talking. You know, there are a lot of examples of authors who are very good at this. J.R. Abercrombie is very well known for having all of his characters have this very distinct character voice, to the point where you can tell what character's perspective you're reading from before you even get a couple lines into the chapter. You kind of like immediately know. They say specific things, and the way the sentence structure and everything is different. You just immediately know straight away when you start reading a chapter from whose perspective you're reading before their name is mentioned in the text. Not all the time, obviously, because sometimes their name will be the first word in the chapter or whatever, but generally this is kind of one of his main writing accolades that he has collected, so to speak. And most authors try to do this. For obvious reasons. It just makes your character more likable and a more realised character, and makes the book more interesting to read, alongside many other advantages. And the way that Martha Wells tries to do this in this book is she makes the chapters from 3's perspective just be in the present tense, which I don't think is necessary at all, because right at the start of the parts of the book that are from 3's perspective, or Murderbot 1.0 for example, it will start by saying Murderbot 1.0. I already know. Murderbot 1.0, right? Let me go find Murderbot 3.0. Sec Unit 3.0. So this is 3. Retrieval in process. And now it's switched to present tense. This, I personally think this is a very bad way to do it. I think this is a failed attempt at doing a writing technique. It just doesn't work for me. It's jarring, and it just doesn't work, in my opinion. These reading the text, there are plenty of differences in the way that these characters are speaking and whatnot, that I don't think it's necessary to switch the tense, and it's just fucking jarring. But the attempt was made, and nonetheless, despite the fact that it's jarring, the chapters in 3 are actually quite good. 3's perspective are actually quite good. And 3 is a character that I find very interesting, because I think that the character dynamic between Murderbot as kind of a mature sec unit that is not being controlled by its government module at this point, kind of mentoring another sec unit in how to live, you know, teach the boy how to live kind of situation, would be really interesting. And I hope 3 is in the next book. But from what is mentioned at the end of this book, I think it's quite possible that they're going to go their separate ways, and they may run into each other later on in another book, which I think will be a bit of a missed opportunity. But that's just my view. Nonetheless, the multi-POV has been tried, and although I think it's far from perfect, I think it's a cool change to the pacing, and it really made the last third of this book feel really snappy. Like the climax of this book really just felt like story beat after story beat after story beat. Like it felt almost Sanderlanchy in a way. Like it moved the. This is kind of related to a previous point that not a previous point, a future point that I'll be making about the middle of this book. But the start of this book is very fast paced. It's like one thing happens, action scene, quick social interaction, Murderbot does a thing, boom, next thing is happening, next story beat is happening, the ship's getting attacked, Murderbot's trying to get everyone out in time before whoever's attacking the ship is getting through the hull, and then Murderbot's got to go down to another section, and it turns out not everyone's managed to get out of their room, and someone's stuck, and Murderbot has to like tromp through the ship last minute while hostiles going to break in, go get these people back. Then we're in a situation where, you know, it's basically just like non-fucking stop shit going on, right? And even in the beginning of the middle part of this book, it's like that too. And the last third of this book, one of the reasons it feels so snappy and it feels like the story's moving at a really good pace in the last third of this book is because it keeps switching perspectives, and everything that's happening in these perspectives is happening at the same time. They're interesting, okay? And that's really what the extra POVs add to this book. And they really enriched the plot a lot for me. It was interesting to see perspectives of other characters, just in general, and it really improved the last third of this book, I think. And it's something that I think would be great to do. You know, this book is double the length of a normal Murderbot book. You know, even if it's just the odd 5-page chapter every 100 pages, that's like what, 15 pages a book, and you put them at really like at good points in the story, they're really going to enrich the story. And I think that I hope to see this happen again in the next book, because I thought this was something that really added to the story. So, well, just the book in general. So yeah, the multiple POVs, I think, I don't know if this is an experiment with it was, but I think it worked. So yeah, that was something that I really liked to see. The last thing I want to talk about is the new direction that this book leaves on, with the implication of Murderbot moving on and possibly joining Art's crew and going on missions to possibly start getting in the Corporation Rim's grill and getting in its fucking way and throwing spanners in the works. Cool as fuck. I'm really looking forward to seeing that happen. And Murderbot joining Art's crew hopefully means that Murderbot and Art are going to be together a lot of the time, and that character dynamic is going to be continued. I'm really looking forward to it. Overall, this book, when I finished it, although the ending was a bit flat, the actual epilogue part of it anyway, I really finished this book being like, damn, I want to see where these books are going to go next. And I'm like, damn, I'll immediately get the next one, because I really want to see what happens. So, you know, considering what I'm going to say about the middle part of this book, I think that's really good. It's not a big point, but it's just, I think that I'm looking forward to the new direction that Murderbot's life is going to take, this new arc that Murderbot's going to go through, because the first 4 novellas of this series felt like a 4-book arc, right? This feels like the first book in a new character arc, in a new story arc for Murderbot, and is one that I'm already invested in as of the first book, which I wasn't with the previous story arc. So that's a massive improvement, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, basically. So yeah, the new direction, I think, sounds really interesting. Last thing I'll put in the good section is kind of a bit of a quick fire thing of different things that I liked about this book as I was reading it. First one is that I thought the action scenes in this book were really good compared to some of the previous ones, especially the action scene that the book starts off with is really fun. Another thing is some of the side characters in this book are a bit better than in the previous books. I think that's because there's a bit more page count dedicated to these characters. Two characters I want to mention specifically, and that is Amena, who is Mensa's daughter. and also Thiago, who is Mensa's brother and also uncle of Amena, who's also on the crew. And I thought that these characters have interesting kind of dynamics and relationships with Murderbot throughout the book, more so than you usually see in these books, quite significantly so. Usually the side characters in these books are really, really, really milquetoast and very boring and just not interesting, in my opinion. So this was a pretty big step up and an interesting change. I thought that the help me file was really interesting, which was basically a bunch of experiences that Murderbot had bundled together to send to other sec units in the event that they wanted to disable their governor module to A, kind of get them to trust them a little bit, and B, kind of give them a little bit of understanding for what it might be like to not have their governor module, which I thought was really cool. I thought the mystery going on the colony was interesting, and another thing that I thought was really interesting was that there's been a lot more focus in this book on the alien remnants and strange synthetics, which is something that's been mentioned repeatedly throughout the books but never really explored. So that was cool. Yeah, so I think there's just some things off the top of my head that I thought were good, but I don't really see that they need their own section or anything. So I'll move on to the things that I didn't like that much about the book. So the first thing I kind of want to bitch about is still the total lack of fucking description of characters. This book is 350 pages long, right? The novellas are all around 170 pages long. Martha Wells could have spared 2 or 3 lines per character in this long-ass book to at least give me a skin colour, hair colour, or hairstyle or something. Even just a individually distinctive element of that character's appearance to help me remember them or distinguish them from other characters. That is not done in this book at all. Like whatsoever. The grey alien, the greys, the colonists who are infected with the alien remnant, they get far more description than any of the main characters. I have some examples of this, and I'll pull them up. So, one of the characters introduced in this book is Amena, who is Mensa's daughter, okay? And Amena's appearance is not described, like at all. The only things that I could find in the whole book, and to be fair, I didn't spend ages looking through it, I'll be honest with you, because quite frankly I shouldn't have to. But the main description that I can remember is she's mentioned just tying her hair back at some point. I vaguely remember this, I think, which means that her hair's like gotta at least be shoulder length, I guess. And she's there's one line that I could find in chapter 15 of Network Effect, which, when Iris, who is a member of Art's crew, is introduced, it says, Iris was small, shorter and slimmer than Rati, and not much bigger than Amena. It's just completely useless description, because I don't know how tall Rati is. It's never been fucking described ever. Okay, so they're small, shorter and slimmer than Rati. Okay, Rati could be ripped for all I fucking know. Rati could be skinny as fuck for all I know. Does that mean Iris is basically fucking... Like, the lack of description has this knock-on effect of more problems. This small piece of description, which is comparing Iris to other characters who have not been described, just makes this line make no fucking sense. It doesn't matter how small, shorter or slimmer than Rati
she is, because I don't have a baseline for what Rati's body type is like. It's never been described. I don't ever remember Rati's appearance ever being described. Ever. I don't even think I know Rati's skin colour. Also, Amena's is not white because Mensa isn't white, which makes logical sense, obviously, but that's all I gotta go on. It's just short length hair. That's all I got. So I don't know. I was willing to ignore this in the novellas, but in a novel, I don't think it's just not good enough. So you know, the book loses points in my head for the lack of description. There is a fine line between letting the reader have their own mental image of a character and expecting the reader to create their own for fucking everything. Those are two very separate things, right? You can describe a character as having shoulder-length hair, having a certain skin colour, and having like one, basically, a part of their appearance that makes them stand out to the crew, right? Let's say, for example, I'm writing a sci-fi series, and I want it to be a kind of Firefly, Expanse style thing where we have a crew, a cast of characters on this ship. Basically, my version of the Rocinante or Serenity or whatever, okay? Okay, and I've got these 5 characters. It's very easy to give each character a distinctive appearance, part of their appearance. For example, one of them just needs to be muscular and tall. One of them just needs to be bold. And it's very easy to give them a unique character trait that only that character in the group has, that makes them stand out and gives you that reader a unique visual image of that character. Okay? In these books, the reader has to do that themselves, and then they have to kind of consistently remember that and keep that in their head and maintain it over multiple books. And for me, the characters, the only reason I have any mental image of the characters in these books is because I've googled the books before and I've seen art on the internet, and it's literally other people's fan art that's like my mental image of these characters, because they're not described at all. You know, like they have no description. It makes the characters feel the ones that don't get any development feel barely like a character. They're just floating names in my head. Like they're not even people, really. And it's bonkers. It's some of the worst character writing I've ever seen. And not only that, but Martha Wells also, in this book, we get hammered with new characters. There's a fucking at least 8 new characters that get introduced in this book. 8 characters! I tell you what, I cannot remember the name of any of Art's crew except for Iris. And the only reason I remember Iris is because I have that line of description written down. I've just read it. Anyway, yeah, the description. It's a seriously weak point of the writing in these books. I would not be surprised if some people just can't read these books, just for that one thing alone. If someone asks me, if I lend the first one of these books to a friend and they say, I can't imagine the characters because they're not described, does that get better in the books? I'm going to have to say no now, because that's the truth. And they're not going to read them. So that's, this is very basic writing. It's not like much is being asked. Just describe the character when they get introduced, and don't introduce fucking 5 characters at once and then keep them around if they're throwaway characters. All the time there's like target 1, 2, 3, 4. Why can't we do this with random side characters that aren't necessary? 8, I think 8 members of Art's crew have been introduced in this book. They're not going to be. They're just going to end up being more shitty throwaway characters that my brain has to remember the name of because Martha Wells wants me to, and they're not going to add anything to the story. They're going to be throwaway. They might turn up once one or two of them might turn up in the next book. Let's be honest, but that's it. So yeah, the character description. Unfortunately, this does not improve in the novel. Unfortunately. Now, it has been made clear to me outside of these books as well that this is just part of Martha Wells's writing style. I'm of the opinion that's not a writing style, that's just choosing not to do a very basic part of creative writing. It's like choosing to try and write a book without the word "the." Like, it doesn't make your book better, it just makes it annoying to read sometimes. So, yeah, just bonkers to me, just absolutely crazy. This is the thing is, for me at this point, having read this book, I'm enjoying these books enough to keep reading them. But the reality is, if I was asked to rank these books on a tier list, right, and let's say S tier, and I'd put up there some like my favourites, right, and then you've got A tier, which are books that I think are really good that aren't necessarily my favourites, right? Okay, then I've got like so there's A tier, and then there's B tier, which is like good books, C tier, which are like good books that have enough good about them that you can read them. These go into C tier so far for things like this that just are not elevating these books. These things need to be sorted out before they can be anything other than just a C tier book to me, which is a shame because there's so many things in these books that are so good, but I try to focus on the good points, but it's kind of like trying to persuade someone that a chair without legs is good. Like, it's a basic part of the book. It's a basic part of creative writing, just writing in general, of prose. You can't just take description away, because then you're just expecting the reader to just make everything up in their head. And sometimes that's fine, right? Sometimes that's fine. There's no such thing as something being objectively wrong or right in writing. There's always times that writing rules can be completely and utterly broken and it'll work brilliantly. But just choosing not to describe characters is just bonkers. Just crazy to me. That's just my opinion. So I'll move on to the next thing that I didn't like about these books. Right. So here I have Critter, which is a basically open source software for editing pictures and such. So I'm going to write two names here. Okay. We have... Let's go over some very basic ideas about how your brain reads words. When you read something, your brain takes the start of the letter and the end of the letter, and if it's a word you're familiar with, it fills the blank and it allows you to read very quickly. There are examples of this on the internet where you have sentences where you can read the whole thing even though most of the words are removed and it's just the first and last letter. So here we go. I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading using this incredible power of the human mind. According to research in Cambridge University, it doesn't matter what order the letters in the word are. The only important thing is that the first and the last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. Amazing, huh? Yeah. And I always thought spelling was important. Blah 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 blah. Okay. I had no trouble reading that whatsoever. So, funny little thing about these two words. They both end in A and they both start in A, and they're basically the same. They are the same length. So your brain is gonna struggle with this a little bit, especially if you're a fast reader like myself. Now, let's say you get rid of this, and we get rid of that. Right. Now, in theory, if there were two characters in a book, and their names are very similar, and these two characters have barely been described, and say for example very little to no effort was made to really distinguish these characters in the text, you might find yourself a bit confused every now and then about who the fuck is talking. Which I did. In this book, I repeatedly was confused about what character I was fucking supposed to be reading the dialogue from, because Arada and Amena have basically exactly the same fucking name. This is just really basic writing, not to make your characters have the same fucking name. I'm not a professional writer, and you know, I've done this before by accident, myself, when I was running a tabletop RPG, Vampire the Masquerade campaign, and that is because I had two characters in my campaign, and one of them was called this Fortum. Okay, Fortum. Then I had another character for Sun. These two characters were completely fucking different characters. The players themselves had no way of mixing these two characters up. One of them was a 1,500-year-old vampire, and one of them was a priest who exorcised ghosts, and they just repeatedly mixed them up every fucking time. And you know what? I can't blame them. Completely my fault. Completely my fault for doing this, for making this mistake. This real amateurish mistake. And I've been running tabletop games for a long time, and unfortunately these are two important characters in a tabletop campaign that has been going on for 6 years now, and is not looking to stop anytime soon. So, we just had one of the characters change their name. Not actually change their actual name, but just had them be referred to by another name. And problem solved. But here's the thing. I don't get paid to do this, okay? I do this for fun. It's a hobby, alright, okay? And even I was beating myself up about it and immediately tried to change it and fix that problem straight away. I'm not Martha Wells, who's written 25 fucking books. She should know not to do this. I'm probably blowing this issue way out of proportion, but this really fucking bugged me. I've never had this problem before when reading a book in my life. Okay, I've read some books before where the characters' names are very similar and it can be a bit confusing. Okay, I've read The Dwarves by Marcus Heights, and in those books the dwarves have very similar names. There's actually a pair of dwarves who are twins and they have very similar names, but the difference between those two characters is they're described, and I can kind of tell as well from what they're saying and how they're acting who's who. The characters in these books are not distinct enough for me to fucking intuit that half the time. Sometimes it is, okay? Amena is a young person and she has a very different relationship with Murderbot. Arada as well, similar situation. Sometimes you can, but sometimes when they're just saying things that aren't really related to their age or whatever, or their relationship with Murderbot, I'm like, who the fuck is speaking again? So, you know, just another example of how some of the writing in this book can be really, really janky and really bugged me. This really annoyed me, because about halfway through the book I just gave up. Thank you, so. Yeah. I'm quite a fast reader, so this kind of just would get in the way. It would majorly get in the way of me just reading the book. So, the Arada Amena problem is what I'll call this one. Really fucking annoyed me, because these are two characters that are very prominent in this book. And I'm repeatedly mixing them up. So I'm going to call this next section, Who the Fuck Are You Again? So lots, like I pretty much already covered this, but lots of characters get introduced in this book, and I could not tell you who the fuck any of them are. I can't distinguish them. They have names, and that is it. It's kind of like if you go into a Zoom meeting at work with 10 people who you've never met and they don't have the cameras on, and you just get told a bunch of names at once, and you just expected to remember them. You won't, will you? You'll have forgotten them within 5 minutes. That's just how the human brain works. Like you go, if you go to work and you try and learn everyone's names on the first day after having met them once each and shook their hands, and you get told their name, you're not going to remember. You're just not going to remember. Some people might be able to. The vast majority of people are not going to fucking remember, and that's the same in this book. This book basically does that, just hardcore does that to you, but it just raw dogs it right into your brain. Absolutely no description, no attempt to explain who these people are, really. To be fair, the characters in Art's Crew get a bit of description when Murderbot finds them and sends in basically sends in a drone to go check on them before approaching them. And some of them get a bit of description, you get their gender and whatnot, but like this is before you know their names, and then when you're told their names aren't attached within the text or any description to physical traits, therefore I don't know who the fuck those people were that were being talked about earlier. There's one guy whose fingers are fucked up, and the only reason I remember is because they're trying to like get something open, and then by the time Murdoch comes over to them, a name is attached to them, and it's mentioned that their hands are bloody. That's the kind of thing that you need to do with every character for me to know who the fuck anyone is. You can't just do it with one character. You gotta do it with everyone. Or I'm not gonna remember who the fuck they are. Yeah, it's just, who the fuck are you? Basically, is a problem I have a lot when I read this. I'm like, who the fuck are you again? Who the fuck are you? Even the villains in this book have that problem a little bit. There's target control system, and there's target control something or other at the end of the end of the book. What the fuck is it even called again? Sorry, there's target contact, and there's... oh, fuck me, I don't even remember, and I've just finished reading it. Yeah, target control system, target contact. I think that might be it. I'm not sure. Oh, target central. Yeah, I don't know. I just got confused by that. I was just like, what the fuck's going on? There's a guy who has a system in him that's controlled by... that's infected and was then basically proliferated throughout the colony to other people, and then it became a system, and now it's in the network and everything. I got that, I completely understood that, but I just... fuck me if I can remember what's what, because like the naming in this game is just... yeah. In this game, sorry, in this book, it's just... yeah. Yeah. Who the fuck are you again? Ironically, was less of an issue in the novellas, even though this would happen where you'd get absolutely ass blasted with characters. In this book, you get ass blasted with them, and then they just don't do anything, really. And then you just like, when the few times they pipe up, you're like, I don't fucking remember who you are. Who the fuck are you? Oh yeah, you're one at Art's Crew. All right, like that's it basically. Yeah, I'm expecting to get some more development in the next book, but this problem's definitely gotten worse with the longer page count, not better. So. And here lies the biggest issue that I have with this book. And I mentioned earlier, the start of this book, the first third or so of this book, it's very snappy. Goes from plot point to plot point. It moves. This book, sorry, this part, the last third, very similar. Very snappy. Moves from thing to thing. Things are happening. It has you on your toes. You're reading. You're hooked. You're interested. Everything in the middle. This middle section, I almost stopped reading about 3 times. In, not this whole middle section, but there's a specific middle section around here that is so fucking boring. There's, basically, it's before Art comes back, and, so, to be honest, even that section is a bit crap. So, basically, after Murderbot turns up on the ship, kills the fuck out of some dudes, which is pretty cool, and then puts Amena into a room, and then just starts locking the place up and walking around, okay? It feels like nothing happens for 100 pages. It feels like nothing fucking happens at all. And a big problem with these books that I'm starting to notice is a lot of the mystery and the things happening is that Murderbot just talks to itself in its head about the things that are going on and like does some deduction, basically. Okay, it's so fucking poorly, like, so poorly shown to the reader. It's just like Murderbot's just talking and talking and talking and talking. It's like you can follow it, but like, goddamn, do you want to? Like, it's just, it's not interesting. Like, if you want to do deduction, you know, there's lots of books out there that show you how to do deduction well. You know, have someone turn to a crime scene and actually analyze it and put the bits and pieces together. You know, don't just have Murderbot run around, pick up those pieces of information, not think about them at all, and then at some point sit down and just think about all the information and just exposit at me for 3 pages. I'm like, oh my god, I'm so bored. I hate it so much. And this happens multiple times in this book. It doesn't just happen once. It happens once with Murderbot. Then it happens later on when Art's back. Then it happens again when it happens again before they go down to the planet. And it takes this story that's moving at a decent pace and it grinds it to a halt. Puts the handbrake down and then just completely bores the shit out of me. And I don't know if this is me comparatively thinking, but this book has some serious meandering middle, like real bad, which is a term that I use to describe books that have a strong start and a strong end, but just the middle is so important. You got to pull off the middle because that's the meat and potatoes of your book. Obviously, it's quite easy to, well, not easy, but once you've got a good start that pulls people in, it's good, it's fine, it works, right? And then you've got as long as it's got a good pace, and you've got a good climax. I mean, if your climax is not interesting, then your whole book's just fucked anyway. So, you know, the climax needs to be good, right? Okay. People will the thing is, I think authors are aware, people will push themselves through the middle, right? I did have to push myself through the middle of this book. Quite a bit. There were week-long periods where I didn't touch it because I just didn't want to. This is the first book, besides Fugitive Telemetry, that I've read in about 10 years that I felt that way about. Make of that what you will. I don't remember the last time I read a book. I think it might have been Tribe or something. Was it by Terry Pratchett? I think it was the only book I've never read a book in my life that I've not finished. I don't remember what it is. My mum bought me a book when I was like 12, and it's the only book I've never finished. I'm generally very good at just enjoying a book for what it has to offer. This is the first time I've ever read a book, and I've struggled to finish it just because the book felt like it stopped offering me any reason to keep reading. Because in the middle, when there's not really much going on with Murderbot, I mean, they have the odd moment, but like the end of this book is the last third of this book is really well paced, and it really kept me reading. as soon as I got to the last third, I pounded it out in that evening, right? The first third as well, I read that all in one evening. As soon as I hit the middle, it took me about 3 weeks to finish this middle bit, right? So we're talking one evening, 3 weeks. Is what it took for me to finish this book. And it's a weird one, because I don't want to say that it's because of the book length. I think it's because of more of what's happening in the book, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like if it was a novella, it wouldn't have had that problem. But then maybe the story wouldn't have been possible in a novella, I don't know. There's a lot of moving parts and issues that I could sit here and dissect forever, but there's not really any point. The middle of this book, it might have been better off being a shorter novel, somewhere maybe between a novel and a novella. Not that the distinction between the two is weird to me in the first place, but Meandering Middle. I found the middle of this book to be very, very slow. The pacing was off, there wasn't much happening. A lot of it was Murderbot just walking around and just talking about the targets and watching them with drones. And it was like... that whole section could have been... Murderbot goes to... because in these books, right, Martha Wells quite often has these like ... bits here. So like, say for example, something's going on here, right? Okay, and then it like cuts to the ... time has passed, okay, because it's stuff that we don't need to see, right? A lot of this book, middle part, could have been more ... could have been a lot more ... and it could have just had a one paragraph explaining what happened, like the others do, and then we move on with the story, you know. But yeah. Yeah. It's a shame because the first third of this book and the last third of this book are by far my favourite Murderbot bits so far. But the middle means that it's dragging it down a lot. Like a lot. So yeah, this is the big main criticism I have. It has some serious meandering middle. Where the story is just not progressing at a pace that is interesting. There's not enough happening with Murderbot. There's a lot of useless, wasted dialogue. There's a lot of planning. Watching characters sit down and plan is not interesting. Okay, it's very hard to make it interesting. Usually, you would just have the characters enact that say, right, okay, guys. One of the characters goes, I've got a plan, and then it cuts to them executing the plan, right? Or it'll be like, right, we need to sit down and talk about this, and then the next shot is like they're in the field and they're executing the mission, kind of thing, right? They don't do the Martha Wells has done the opposite here, done the complete opposite, and it just wasn't working for me at all. Yeah, so there we go. That's the last negative thing I have to say about Network Effect. So yeah, that's Network Effect. Everything I liked and didn't like about it included. I've been quite critical of this one, and the Meandering Middle section especially is quite seriously critical of the book. And I think rightfully so, but you know, the reality is I did enjoy the parts of this book that I liked. I really, really liked. So I want to say that it is still probably up there. It's up there with Exit Strategy for me. Exit Strategy has just been the best one so far, I think, really. But I liked the things that I liked in this book. I liked a lot more than Exit Strategy. So, you know, I suppose it's kind of a toss-up between the two. But this book has a lot of it makes a lot of promises. It has a lot of setup. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. And I'm looking forward to finally being caught up with Murderbot. And I'm also looking forward to moving on to reading something else. So, yeah. That is Network Effect by Martha Wells.